I'm 51 years old and have been in business for 30 years. But here's the truth. I wish I knew in my 20s what I know now. If I could sit down with my 21-year-old self, I'd walk him through the 10 harsh business truths every young entrepreneur needs to hear today. But would I have listened? I had confidence, hustle, big dreams, like many of you watching this video. Still, it would have been easier if I had that roadmap. So if you're in your 20s and ready to launch your business or build something on your own terms, then this video is for you. I'm sharing the reality check I wish someone gave me when I first started out all those years ago. My name is Richard Gerritsen-Cornell, and this channel is dedicated to helping people create their own destinies. I've been in business for 30 years, helping brands sell more of their products and services, but most importantly, I will show you how to cope and succeed in your journey whilst enjoying it along the way. So let's get into it. Harsh truth number one, business isn't as easy as it looks. Now, I'll never forget the day I resigned from my high-paying job. I was 21, full of confidence, I had a ton of ability and was ready to set the world on fire. But I had absolutely no idea of what I was getting myself into. I had no clients, not much money, but I always thought that I had a pretty good understanding on how to make money, and I was very good at selling. I thought it was going to be easy. All I had to do was get some clients and I'd be off and running, right? I had a few $1,000s saved and I thought that, that would be enough for me to sort of get some momentum happening. But I soon learned very quickly that just because I was ready didn't mean the rest of the world was ready for me yet. Now, looking back, I think my confidence got the better of me. Either way, I was going to make it happen. I stayed up each night writing down phone numbers of businesses that I wanted to call, and my days were filled with making calls and setting up appointments. The method was correct, but I didn't take into account the client's decision-making process, and this really started to play havoc on my ability to secure more clients and get paid quickly. Yet despite all the other things that I had to do, my sole focus was getting clients, but it just wasn't that easy, especially when I needed to start paying for my own expenses. However, luckily for me, I lived at home with my parents. I was young and they supported me, so I didn't have to draw a wage, as that simply just wasn't possible at the time. So if I had to go back and teach myself one lesson, it would be to give myself a buffer zone of at least 6 months where I could not expect to make enough money to support myself, but with persistence, I did get through. But mate, those were some of the most challenging days that I'd ever experienced in my business journey. Harsh truth number two, learn your craft for longer. Now, at the time of starting my business, I was one of the youngest art directors in Sydney. My job was paying me well, I had created some amazing campaigns, and I felt that starting my own agency, it'd be easy, right? And I wanted a piece of that action, but my immaturity didn't let me see of what my bosses and their agencies had been through to get to where they were, right? So I only focused on my own ability, my confidence, and my ability to sell, and I thought everything else would take care of itself. I didn't see how difficult it was for my bosses to win clients, gather leads, and see the mechanics of forming relationships. Very important. All I saw were these massive clients, which I was doing all the creative for, and how successful my bosses became as a result of my work. So if I was to go back and give myself any lesson, it would be to stay working in the industry for at least 10 years. If I had done that, I still would have only been 30, 31, and I would have more than likely either been made a partner or a managing director of one of the top agencies. Worst case scenario, I would have been able to see how everything worked, and I also would have formed tremendous relationships. And to this day, if I had any regrets, it would be that I didn't sort of stay in the industry for longer. I would have accelerated my business growth tenfold. Harsh truth number three, be more serious with your spare time. Now, fortunately for me, it didn't take me long to start winning clients, right? And I started to make enough money to live on. However, again, coming back to my immaturity, I was only 21 and I was wanting to have fun with my mates. I was dedicated and I worked my ass off, but because I started making money, I became complacent. I just assumed that with every client that I picked up, that they would stay forever and I would keep growing as easily as that. And needless to say, I didn't account for client churn. I just let my business grow organically, and even though I still made sales calls and I was focused on growing my business, I just didn't have the experience to know what lay ahead. But luckily for me, I was still very young. I wasn't married, had no kids, and basically had myself to look after. That was it. And soon enough, my business started to grow. And this enabled me to learn from my mistakes, all before I did end up getting married and having my first child some 10 years later. So if I was to go back and give my 20-year-old self some advice, it would be to take more time, or my time I should say, more seriously, and not rely on organic growth or referrals, especially if you're thinking about having a family, because otherwise I simply wouldn't have been able to stay operating because kids cost money and I just didn't have much of it at the time. Harsh truth number four, working for yourself, it isn't the same as building a brand. Now, for me at the time, building a brand was simply having a brand name that I would refer to myself as, right? And I always did dream of having a well-known brand. But again, my inexperience, it didn't teach me how to raise enough awareness to build my brand. I just assumed that working for myself long enough, it would evolve into a reputable business and brand. I just didn't see how my brand needed more than just awareness to grow. Now, mind you, in those days, there was no internet, there was no social media, no way to promote yourself other than traditional advertising and marketing. And back then, it was extremely expensive. So I suppose I just accepted that it would take time, and I was happy enough to let my growth be organic. But if I was to go back, I would have told myself that building a brand requires planning. It needs exposure and it needs money. And if I wanted to build my brand, then I should not use all my profits just to hire staff and spend it on myself. Harsh truth number 5, don't underestimate the power of planning. Okay? Now, I always prided myself on being careful and able to implement and follow financial plans. And the plans that I used to write for my business, they were highly detailed and showed me exactly how I needed to scale, or so I thought, right? But because my plans were so detailed, they became somewhat difficult to implement. Why? Because I set too many tasks without specific timeframes on when I needed to achieve them by. My plans were more of a guide, and if I didn't complete the tasks on my plan, then I'd simply roll them over to the next month, right? And this was all because I was content with the money that I was making. And this also comes back to me relying on organic growth. I just wasn't accountable to myself, right? Because in my eyes, I was in my early 20s, I was running my own business when basically none of my friends were doing what I was doing, and I thought I was doing pretty good. But when I look back to my younger self, I would have told myself to make my plans much simpler and give myself actionable tasks with specific milestones to achieve them by, and to constantly hold myself to account. I also should have incorporated how I was going to raise awareness of my brand and not just focus on winning new clients and making more money. I suppose that making more money, it shouldn't have been my sole focus, but again, this comes down to my lack of experience on my part at the time, but lessons I learned along the way. Now, before we jump into the next business truth, I've got a quick ask. If you're in your 20s and want some more straight up, no bullshit content about starting and growing your business, hit that like button and subscribe. This helps me push the video to more young founders, future CEOs, side hustlers, and aspiring entrepreneurs just like you. And if you want some more content on business mindset, personal growth, or how to build your brand from scratch, then let me know in the comments below. I've got you covered. Harsh truth number 6. Doing everything yourself stunts your growth. Now, it took 5 years in business before I put on my first employees. To be fair though, I was content working on my own, long hours, that sort of thing, because I was being well rewarded financially, but it didn't take me long to take the plunge and go for it, right? And then everything started to go great. I was then focused on selling whilst my employers did most of the work, but for the years that I procrastinated about adding staff, I was missing out on opportunities to grow my brand quicker. I was too focused on the smaller details that I wasn't seeing the bigger picture. I was too concerned with the possibilities of my employees making mistakes that it stunted my growth. It took some time for me to realize that my staff were my biggest asset, and making mistakes, it just comes with the territory. But in time, I started to implement systems for staff to follow. I just wish I had the knowledge and foresight to know this sooner. And with all the books I read about how to hire staff, when's the right time to hire staff, and so on, I suppose my initial fear was holding me back. And this all came down to a lack of experience on my part, and especially considering that I was only 26 at the time when I put on my first employees. So if I was going to give my younger self any advice, it would be to start investing in staff and implement systems and not try to do everything myself. Very important. Harsh truth number 7, the power of dreaming big. I never wanted to be the biggest or the best agency in Australia. For me, it was all about creating my own destiny and being basically in control of the life that I wanted, right? I just wanted a business that gave me the ability to work on my own terms, and although I was super competitive, my ambitions never really went past that. I just wanted to make sure that I was my own boss and I have a career that I directed. For me, it was never to be the richest man in the world. It was to have a very comfortable life. But in thinking with this mindset, I didn't realize that I was the one holding my business back. However, as the years went by, my company grew and I started to become recognized in the industry. And as I grew, I also started to change my perception of growth. I started to understand that in order to grow, you need to think big and set your aspirations on levels which may seem out of reach. Why? Because when you think big, big things start to happen, right? You stop putting boundaries on your growth and you start to see growth in a whole different light. Now, when you dream and think big, you start to see opportunities that you may not have thought of before. So if I was going to go back again to my younger self in my 20s, I would tell him to think big and dream big. And if you stick at it, then big things will start to happen. Harsh truth number 8. You need money to scale. In my infancy days of business, for me, it was all about making enough money to have a good life without having to think too much about the costs. And that's all fine, but to grow your business, you need cash. Now, whether you come up with the cash yourself or whether you take on equity partners, either way, you will need cash to scale your business. And whether you realize it or not, scaling your business doesn't usually happen exactly when you're ready, right? Opportunities will present themselves, and whether you have the cash or not at the time, mate, these opportunities will not wait. So whether you win some new clients that require like more staff, or whether you need, money to invest in new technologies quickly, you will need cash at that very specific time. And this was something that I didn't understand in the early days. I just always thought that I would grow at my own pace when I invested in it and when I was ready. But in reality, if you don't have the cash at that right time, then you're gonna miss out on opportunities to scale. So if I was gonna go back to my 20-year-old self and give him some advice, it'd be to factor some cash into my reserves, into my planning, to be able to take advantage of the growth as they present themselves to me. Harsh truth number 9, be fussy with the clients that you attract. When I first started out, I chased any client that was willing to spend money with my business. I didn't care if they were small or one-off jobs, right? I just thought that the more clients I won, the better. And for me, every new client win was a win, and a win that I should be celebrating. But it wasn't until I realized that working with everyone is not healthy for your business. Some clients will drain your time and resources, and some will not appreciate your value. I was also too scared to target the big fish clients because I felt insecure that they wouldn't take me seriously because I was in my very early 20s. I underestimated my worth, but more importantly, I underestimated the value that bigger clients brought to my business. So I started contacting bigger brand names, and even though in some cases they took well over 1 or 2 years to land, these bigger clients, they ended up enabling my business to scale in ways that smaller one-off clients couldn't provide for my business. So if I was going to go back to my younger self, I would tell him not to be scared and not waste time wondering if I was good enough to land these bigger clients. I would encourage my younger self to implement a plan that factor in bigger clients with reoccurring revenue opportunities from day one, as this is where true growth happens. Harsh truth number 10, you don't need 30 years to be successful in business. If I knew then what I know now after 30 years in business, I would have been able to get to where I am today in more than half the time. You often see entrepreneurs when they're asked, if you lost everything today, could you go back to where you are now and get on top again? And all of them say uncategorically yes. Why? Because they have the experience. They've already solved those problems that they encountered through their own journey. They understand where they failed and where they needed to achieve. They wouldn't need to make all those mistakes again because they've lived it. Now, experience counts for everything. They wouldn't need to sit there wondering, should I, shouldn't I, without stressing about the what ifs, right? And with all the books that I read in my early stages, all the free events that I went to and learned about growing the business, there's nothing like lived experience, because being in business for decades, it gives you not just experience, but also resilience. It lets your brain know that there's nothing to worry about because you have the answers, yeah? So if I was to go back to my younger self in my 20s, it would be to seek out people or entrepreneurs who can guide you and help you with your journey. Whether it's a mentor or someone who has operated a successful business for a longer period of time, don't be afraid to ask them questions for help and advice. You will find that entrepreneurs, they love helping people who were like them all those years ago. So don't hold back, I should say, and don't be scared to ask for help, as this is again how you can grow your business. So key takeaways here are, number 1, remember business isn't as easy as it looks. Number 2, learn your craft for longer than before you take that plunge. 3, be more serious with your spare time. 4, working for yourself isn't the same as building a brand. 5, don't underestimate the power of planning. 6, doing everything yourself stunts your growth. Number 7, remember to dream big. 8, you need money to scale. 9, be fussy with the clients that you attract. And number 10, you don't need 30 years to be successful. Now this wraps up my video today. Comment below if you're in your 20s and want to start a business. Then understand that it doesn't cost you anything to listen to more experienced business owners. There is absolutely nothing wrong with seeking advice from entrepreneurs who have the answers, right? Even if it costs you money, because that money that you spend, that's going to save you time, which you just cannot put a price on. And if you want some more inspiration, if you're tired in your 9-to-5 narrative or want to become a successful young entrepreneur, then be sure to watch another one of my videos on why the 40-hour work week is broken, as this will give you some insights to get started. Also, please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, as I have a heap more coming. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Cheers.